I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's May 6th, 2025. The RFK Stadium rebuild is one of the largest development projects currently under consideration in the region, and DC is divided over the $1 billion it has to contribute. In Montgomery County, a neighborhood organizes to stop a drug rehab facility from setting up, but anonymously. The new county income tax increase proposed by County Executive Mark Elrich shapes into a debate between progressivism and revenue volatility. Meanwhile, the County Council approves 3 collective bargaining agreements with the local public sector unions and overrides an executive veto offering tax rebates for office to apartment conversions and more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Arlington-based experimental music composer and producer Pierre Bernasconi. There is a lot of AI music in this genre today, but not here, where Bernasconi used a Minilogue, Cobalt 8X, and LTD guitar with Focusrite, as well as the software Reaper DAW and many FX pedals. You can find his music on SoundCloud and YouTube. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser and the Washington Commanders organization announced last week a $3.7 billion rebuild of the RFK Stadium, bringing the football team that wears the name of the city back to the district after nearly 30 years in suburban Landover, Maryland. The city is divided. At a time when the city's budget has been constrained by the Republican Congress, the $1 billion and more investment in football is likely to divert money from school and library renovation, public safety investments, and more. But Mayor Bowser says that this is about dollars and cents, and the investment will pay off for a largely neglected part of the city. Normally, public funding of stadium complexes are a losing proposition. But Washington, D.C. has had a successful, if controversial, example in the Nationals baseball stadium in Southeast D.C., which helped revitalize the area around the stadium, even if the actual bond payment burdens continue for the city taxpayers. The D.C. Council is divided, with council members Charles Allen and Janice Lewis George opposing the investment. Greater Washington, an urbanist advocacy group, said in a blog post that they expect the stadium to cost much more, around $5 billion, and DC's share would be greater than the announced $1.1 billion number. While the policy battles play out, we reached out to Laura Nunn, who is an active community member, PTA leader, green space preservation advocate, who lives in Kingman Park, adjacent to RFK Stadium.
Kingman Park is in the northeast quadrant of the city. If you go 2 blocks from my house, you'll hit Oklahoma Avenue. On the other side of Oklahoma Avenue is where kind of the RFK campus begins. Whenever there's an event in the stadium, you can hear what's going on over there. Kingman Park is at the intersection of 3 wards. So Kingman Park, up until recently, was the only section of Ward 7 that was west of the river. To the north of us is Ward 5, And then west of what used to be immediately west of my house, which now is the Ward 7 line has moved a little bit further, a few blocks further down, would be Ward 6. Kingman Park, historically a neighborhood for middle, upper class African American families. We've had an influx. Our community has become more mixed because Kingman Park is the neighborhood that's directly adjacent and our A and C encompasses the campus. A lot of that traffic footprint is going to impact us.
What is the affected population we're talking about here?
I think it's like a few thousand. Kingman Park has kind of been an historically vocal community when it comes to these kind of city issues. This current stadium fight isn't the first time that this community has voiced their concerns. I mean, they were voicing concerns about metro expansion, way back in the 70s. They've expressed concern about a proposal to put an amusement park on Kingman Island. What differentiates us a little bit sometimes from the other neighborhoods is having a really engaged civic association.
So, what are you and your neighbors thinking about with respect to these new plans for RFK Stadium?
There are definitely residents who are very anti and would like to bring it to a stop. But I think for the most part, the community is preparing itself for the inevitability of this project and how to minimize harms and maximize benefits.
Okay, let's start with the people that completely oppose.
There's a very strong feeling that there's really not sufficient affordable housing. There's not enough grocery stores east of downtown. They're looking to see their communities prioritized in that way before money is spent on sports and entertainment.
Do they think that having this big investment would not then get them the grocery store?
Even if it does, I think some of them don't feel like what they have to give up to get it is worth it.
What do they have to give up?
Some people really value the quiet side of the neighborhood.
So let's talk about the people that say maybe with conditions. What is their argument?
I think a lot of people want something to happen. I think there's a certain amount of fear that if this doesn't happen, then the neighborhood will be abandoned again.
Was the neighborhood abandoned before? It seemed like a great place to live.
I think it's a great community, but I think there's kind of this notion that it could be better.
Better in what direction is the question, really?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I moved into the neighborhood, I was really excited. He wasn't technically my council member, but the Ward 6 council member was Tommy Wells. And he was advocating a livable, walkable community. I felt an optimism. I liked the energy of the people in my community and what they were trying to build from the inside out, as opposed to the way the city is coming in.
The folks that say maybe
a broad range of things. I think there are people who are worried about traffic and parking. People keep talking about there's only going to be 9 games. And the city's like, no, we're going to activate 200 days a year.
What does the parking look like?
Ideally, the community would want underground parking. Because of the water table, that's nearly impossible. It would cost, billions of dollars.
Put it across the river and then have a ferry.
Based on the designs that were presented Monday, it's going to be parking structures along the line between the houses and the RFK campus. The folks who are living along Oklahoma Avenue, living along kind of that main thoroughfare, are going to, spend their weekends looking out at giant parking structures and watching, the streams of traffic, up and down the street. And now we're talking about walling in the neighborhood with these parking structures.
Bowser was on Kojanamdi, and she said that there's going to be significant green space.
There's definitely concern about how that 30% is going to be counted. We're leery to take that at face value. Even when there hasn't been football at the stadium, the events DC and the folks running the campus have really prioritized community needs and wants. Anytime they have these big festivals, access to Kingman Island, access to the parks becomes completely cut off. They block the trail. Like everything becomes dedicated to whatever event they're having.
DC famously has the ANC system to provide this kind of feedback to the government. Do you think that system is not working?
I have relationships with almost all our former ANCs. And they have relationships with different groups and different people in the city. I'm closely tied to kind of the environmental groups. I do a lot of volunteer work with Kingman Island, and Kingman Island kind of sits in the center of the Anacostia River. The main access route to the island is through Lot 6 of the campus. And historically, we've had issues with even like city workers not being able to get to Kingman Island because Events DC has closed off access.
Where is Tommy Wells on this?
He's retired now, and Kingman Island is a really important thing to him. And I think he really likely would prefer minimal disruption to all the work he's put in personally to helping Kingman Island become a state conservation area and getting more people to appreciate the importance of the natural resource in the city. But I have not explicitly have a conversation with him about how he feels about the stadium projects.
What is your ask list?
Maintaining accessibility to kind of the recreation and green space, biking and walking. We have so many more young kids back in this neighborhood in the last few years. And I think there's, a real concern about what that looks like with changing. I've been asking for the Sportsplex for a really long time.
Maybe the Commanders will do that for you.
The frustrating thing is that we had that opportunity and the city just didn't value what the community asked for.
Yeah, and the consequence, I guess you're saying, is that there is lack of trust, that you don't really trust the city to deliver.
Yeah.
What can the city do to win your trust back?
I don't feel like the city is actively sitting down with residents and outlining the things that are a priority in a fashion that will result in deliverables.
Lauren Ann, thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Tommy Wells is retired DC council member and former director of the DC Department of Energy and Environment, and a powerful voice still in the city. In Brookville, which is part of the larger Olney area of Montgomery County, Maryland, a different neighborhood objects to a different project. Near Greenwood Elementary School, a Florida company called USR Holdings, which runs drug use rehab facilities called the Freedom Center, is planning new treatment locations. The neighborhood is up in arms about traffic, public safety, and legality. The fine print of the law allows residential care facilities to open by right in residentially zoned neighborhoods if they serve 8 or fewer patients. This law has existed for 2 decades. The company has bought 2 adjoining homes where they will serve 8 women in one and 8 men in the other. Neighbors claim that the facility requires special conditional use permits because they will in fact be run as a single treatment facility. It is hardly remarkable for neighborhoods to oppose facilities like drug rehab centers and homeless shelters in their neighborhoods. What is extraordinary about this particular case is that those opposing the treatment facility do not want to come out in the open. They maintain an anonymous email, greenwooddrugrehab@gmail.com, and a website, but do not answer questions about who they are except that they are neighbors. Even news stories on WTOP and other media do not include the name of the protesters. After asking for an interview, I was contacted by a local resident who said she was not part of the group, and while willing to share background information, she did not want to be interviewed on the record. Anonymous protest has a long history, but anonymity is also a protest dampener. It denies protesters the ability to put a face on the problem and weakens the movement. Based on how Montgomery County's elected officials are responding, it seems that local protesters are unlikely to prevail. Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich recently withdrew his proposal to increase property taxes and instead has proposed raising county income tax rates from 3.2% to 3.3%. The State General Assembly raised the income tax cap last session. The property tax increase was openly opposed by council members Evan Glass, Andrew Friedson, and Lori Ann Sales. But now, with the income tax increase, Elrich has claimed that it is more progressive since higher earners pay more. But County Council staff has said that income taxes are more volatile than property taxes, which tend to be steady. Income taxes include capital gains from stock market profits, for example. Last week, there was an omnibus discussion of budget issues, which started with the impact of collective bargaining agreements. Here is County Council Staff Executive Director Craig Howard, followed by budget analyst Aaron Tramka.
The total FY26 compensation costs recommended in the executive's March 14th operating budget total $4.7 billion, which is a 9.5% increase over FY25.
Budget analyst Aaron Tramka.
For the county government, starting with general wage adjustments, for the Fraternal Order of Police, FOP, the executive recommends a 4.85% GWA for this upcoming fiscal year. And we note that the GWA for FOP members is a good bit higher than that for other bargaining units. The key point here is the executive thought it was important to keep the starting salaries for county police officers at the same level as Anne Arundel County Police Department so that those two jurisdictions would have the highest starting salaries for police officers in the region. For firefighters, IAFF, the recommendation is a 3.25% GWA, and for McGeo and non-represented employees, a recommendation of 3% GWAs. For the 12-month period ending in January 2025, the CPI for the DC area was at about 2.7%, so all the GWAs recommended would exceed that amount. The executive recommends that for employees who are not at top of grade, a service increment of 3.5% for most employees. The executive's budget also includes funding for longevity increments. The increase in benefit costs this year is actually greater in a dollar amount than the increase for pay adjustments. And total retirement costs will be growing at about 18% if the executive's budget is approved, primarily driven by pension costs, and that's primarily a function of the pension plan enhancements that went into effect in the past couple of years, plus higher than anticipated salary increases.
And then Council Member Marilyn Balcombe expressed frustration about expenses growing faster than revenue.
We were presented first with a property tax increase that the community overwhelmingly rejected, as many of my colleagues also rejected. We're now faced with the income tax increase to cover the increasing cost of county services. What is most frustrating about the budgetary process is that once this compensation decision is made today, there is very little discretionary cost that left to cut. We know what we need to do. We have a policy in place to preserve long-term budget sustainability by confirming that our annual growth rate of compensation is similar to our annual growth rate of tax-supported revenues. This process is not sustainable. Our unions have negotiated in good faith throughout that long process. We don't get to weigh in on that. There's been a mismatch of what our means are and what we're providing in the contracts. So I just needed to say that, and we're going to be faced with how are we going to fund all the services that are necessary and at the same time not overburdening our residents with increased taxes and fees. We are faced with the second proposed tax increase in the 3 years that I've been here.
Despite the frustrations, the County Council unanimously passed the pay increases and the 3 collective bargaining agreements. Council President Kate Stewart called the motion first for the pay increases and then individually for each of the three collective bargaining agreements.
We have before us again a Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee recommendation on the four components of the compensation and benefits for all agencies. All those in favor of the committee's recommendation, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. All right.
Following the pay increases came the override of the executive's veto of the bill by Councilmember Andrew Friedson and Councilmember Natalie Fanny Gonzalez to give 25-year property tax rebates for converting office buildings to apartments. Councilmember Will Jawando follows Council President Keith Stewart's opening.
Item 4 is action on expedited Bill 2-25, taxation payments in lieu of taxes, affordable housing amendments. This bill was enacted by Council on April 8th, 2025, and vetoed by the County Executive on April 21st, 2025. The Council is considering action to override the County Executive's veto. Before getting into Council comments, I'll ask if there's a motion to approve expedited Bill 2-25, overriding the County Executive's veto. Councilmember Natalie Fanny Gonzalez moved, Councilmember Lukey second, and now we'll turn it over to Council members for questions and comments. First, I have Councilmember Jawando.
In my view, it is fiscally irresponsible for the county to override this veto because this extremely broad bill does not have the appropriate fiscal guardrails to protect the county, especially given our last conversation. I'm concerned that there still may not even be a common understanding about how broadly the bill was written and who it applies to. Just yesterday, council staff provided council members a list of 17 properties that would currently qualify for the pilot. Notably, all of these buildings were assessed property taxes in 2024, totaling more than $3 million. Taxes that would likely rise after these buildings are redeveloped and which would be abated by this bill. A few other observations about that list. First, it appears to be incomplete. For example, it doesn't appear to include the URW 2,000 square foot Sears building at Montgomery Mall, which has been vacant for more than 5 years. Notably, expedited Bill 225 was specifically amended to ensure that Montgomery Mall and Wheaton Mall, both owned by this company, would qualify for the pilot following the advocacy of URW's counsel, who testified at the public hearing for the bill. The list also does not appear to account for properties that may be eligible for the pilot due to the bill being made retroactive in committee during the legislative process, which is an analysis planning completed at my request. Those are not on the list. Second, this bill also doesn't include the buildings that are soon to be vacant, which would also qualify for the bill. For example, when Geico moves its corporate headquarters to downtown Bethesda next year in 2026, it's a 26-acre property in Friendship Heights that it currently is inhabiting, one of the most desirable and expensive properties in the region, will then include a vacant office building along with mostly green space. The Geico property was confirmed at a previous meeting of the council by council staff that it would be covered by the pilot before we pass the bill, even though most of the property is beautiful empty land.
The discussion that followed demonstrated that minds had been made up on this issue for some time now, and the roll call reflected 9-2 support for the veto override, with Jawando and Councilmember Kristen Mink against. This coming Friday, May 9th, Montgomery County's Chief Administrative Officer, Rich Madileno, joins us for a budget conversation. Don't forget to tune in. That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that comes out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities of Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Arlington-based experimental music composer and producer Pierre Bernasconi. You can find his music on SoundCloud and YouTube.